The value of yesteryear's prophetic announcements is known by subsequent developments, which disclose the reality contained in the prophecy. Hence, in concluding this exposition of physical continuity of the universe and the modern features confirming its reality, there is fulfillment of yesteryear's dreams so long denied. In such manner is established the eternal worth of bygone prophets and their prophecies. Thus, in an acknowledgment of ancient disclosures of other worlds, the events of this time show cosmic reality to be diametrically opposed to the presentations of the astronomical star chart. And it is established for all who will see that from Pluto to Mercury, and from Cygnus to Centaurus, the land mass underlying the continuous skylight of whatever magnitude of brightness is as dense as the land on which our terrestrial civilization is built. Throughout the entire celestial realm that condition applies. From Phoenix to Cepheus and Lupus, and from Indus through the celestial areas of Delphinus and Polaris, there is evidence the flashing facets of an incomparable skylight diamond fashioned by a master hand. The skylight beacons, named stars, guide the course of mariners on the swelling ocean's play. And they direct the lonely desert pilgrim who has faltered in his way. Throughout the Creator's realistic universe structure, the lights speed limitless messages of hope and inspiration as they dutifully weave a million luminous shrines for astrological faithfuls. What difference does it make, to one who hopes, if the skylight areas are named stars? The beacons and the shrines are each and every one just patches of God's magnificent and protective skylight, which glows and fades from time to time and from place to place. And, in spite of the illusions they present and the delusions they impose, who could conceive a greater perfection for the divine expression? Could the light's measure of guidance be considered less through advancement of knowledge concerning their creatively realistic foundation as areas of protective sky? Could the hope and the ambitions of astrology's ardent adherents be diminished through discernment of the eternal foundation and the factual expressions of their shrines? Could it detract from the measure of spiritual uplift for the religiously devout to know that the light which shone over Bethlehem was of the nature of all celestial and terrestrial skylight? Would not the very intensity of that light over Bethlehem was of the nature of all celestial and terrestrial skylight? Would not the very intensity of that light over Bethlehem proclaim the superiority of the infant whose arrival it announced? And would his magnificence be less if the light was known as skylight or as a star? Moreover, how could the light be considered more purposeful through the designation star when star has been proved to be in the category of the illusory? That truth was not known when Christ was born. A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. And the intensified brilliancy of any skylight area would be just as bright and as purposeful by any other name than star. The illusion-based framework of astronomy prescribes star chart designations for luminous celestial sky areas as stars of varying brightness. And the measure of brilliancy extends from that of the first magnitude to the light diminishing point of the 21st magnitude, and fainter. But that which is prescribed by astronomy represents in a universe of reality the varying and extremely purposeful skylight intensity. The variations may be considered as follows. Is the sky gas jet turned high or low? Is there a 50-watt bulb or a 500-watt bulb burning at the celestial point of our immediate observation? Astronomical planets, star clusters, double stars, galaxies, nebulae, or the Milky Way, are additional aspects of the infinite celestial skylight, which extends over celestial land and water areas. And the sky and its light exist even though the vagueness of light over some celestial land and water areas defies telescopic detection. The identical variation of celestial skylight brilliancy, now proved to apply to our terrestrial sky, would impel celestial astronomers to provide the same identifying labels of star, star cluster, or Milky Way to luminous areas of our terrestrial sky. It is no longer a secret that terrestrial skylight areas present to inhabitants of celestial land areas all that which celestial skylight areas present to observation from terrestrial land locations. And, lest it be forgotten, the Celestians must look up or out from their land positions to observe the heavens above, presented by terrestrial skylight areas, even as terrestrial inhabitants look up or out to view the heavens above, presented by celestial skylight areas. The skylight presentation can never change while the universe and its life endure. From the distant and unknown hour of man's terrestrial arrival, the creation's lights have mystified the colorful high priests of ancient pagan ritual, and then the sages and prophets of expanding civilization wondered about the luminous splendor of celestial skylight areas comprising our so-called heavens above. Some were gifted with an inner sight, which enabled them to envisage other worlds of godly ordination beyond this meager terrestrial area. And their attunement with the sublime creative element inspired eloquent utterances of other worlds. Then vague record of their extraordinary disclosures was made on stone and parchment. And then, alas, the import of their disclosures was made obscure. Their dictums did not represent the flaunting of shallow and boisterous egotism. They reflected pure ego linked to the unfathomable prima causa. Their attunement with First Cause, or God, endowed them with clearest perception of the universe structure. Know and name that attunement as one will, a spark of divinity, divine revelation, perception, intuition, inspiration, cosmic consciousness, or whatever may please the individual fancy. The incontrovertible fact is that along the line of human march there has been from time to time the humble mortal conveyors of shining fragments of truth absolute. And that truth was so articulate that average human attempts at interpretation rendered it inarticulate. It was like a blinding light which made seeing impossible. They of such extraordinary endowment were noble but wretchedly burdened souls. For they were designed as mediums through which tiny portions of realistic creative development were to be disclosed for the uplift and growth of mankind. Alas, that arrangement by divine will was not to be imposed without resentment by the multitude at the time and place of disclosure. They feared the intrusion by an unknown purveyor of so unknown a product as creative truth. Hence they whose strange inner sight permitted them to perceive beyond the ability of their brethren were never welcomed for the richness of their disclosures. On the contrary, they were viewed with alarm as some strange malady come to plague mankind. Thus did the normal but nonetheless unwholesome fear of the unknown demand that, in the community of blind men, he who has sight must be destroyed. And destroyed they were, with hemlock drink, with crucifixion, and with other more advanced forms of assassination. Therefore, fateful, complex, and confusing have been the attempts to interpret the universe of reality. But the attempts have persisted since that hour of divine revelation, when the soul of the ancient prophet Moses attuned to the voiceless decree of other worlds ordained from the beginning. And the decree's uplifting message of promise was interpreted through the voice of Moses to the poor in spirit of his particular time and place. There are other worlds fashioned as this earth. Yet who among the tribes of that time and place was capable of fathoming the meaning in words which were of utmost clarity to Moses? Who of that desolate era could have been expected to place credence in the profound message Moses had received? Could the obscured word multitude of that time and place tuning, as did obscured word creative development so extravagantly rich and fine as to be lost to average attunement? There were, however, Among the multitude a few bold souls who, though failing to grasp the import of the prophet's message, fearfully repeated the message. And the repetition caused vague record of the prophet's words to be carried along the corridors of time. But the all-knowing could not be defeated. He disclosed to the immortal Christus the secret of his vast universe construction. And the Christus, with magnificent parable, vainly reiterated the earlier pronouncement of other worlds like unto this earth. In my Father's house are many mansions. He who truly seeks will find. Again the inspiring and guiding pronouncement of Revelation proved to be too profound for acceptance. Though it was never to be forgotten, it was never believed. And the Christly offer of many mansions was ridiculed by the scribes and the Pharisees who would not see. Their misinterpretations of Christly parable made our Father's house, the universe whole, a shambles of vague conjecture opposed to Christly dictum. And for nearly 2,000 years access to any land area of the universe about us has been denied to terrestrial inhabitants. At a later time and place in the advance of civilization, the meaning of Christly parable was rendered more obscure through professional and commercialized observation and abstract figuring of the universe. Hence Christ's lofty parable, which embraced creative reality, was considered to have application only to the ideal of nirvana, utopia, and paradise. Popular misconception, given form by dictates of abstract theory, held that the many mansions imply nothing more important than the conditioning of minds during this stage of human existence. And the profound truth of universe structure was supplanted by fiction evolved from hypotheses based on the illusory. That fiction, masquerading as fact, was capable of projecting a severely imposing universe structure. But the projection of illusion as fact represented a foundationless Father's house, the universe whole, diametrically opposed to creative origin and Christly disclosure. There is no record that Christ or Moses explained the reasons for the many worlds of their disclosure. Nor did they describe the land course into such worlds. But it is reasonable to conclude that Christ would have provided adequate explanation if he had survived the multitude's fear and hatred of unknown arbiters of land beyond the earth. That land beyond was unknown to the scribes and the Pharisees of Christ's time. Later the Quran described the conjectured extremities of the earth as lands of eternal darkness. Hence they were fearful areas leading into hell, and Christ's message of intended inspiration, for the theorists as well as the multitude, served only to accentuate their fear. Now, 3,300 years after the disclosure by Moses, and nearly 2,000 years since Christ spoke of many inhabited universe areas like the earth, there is blazoned a United Press dispatch under date of April 25, 1955. Russian scientists to drive tractor over the surface of the moon. Fantastic? Such words apply only insofar as the new procedure, invention or discovery, must be considered unreal because of its newness. Today's broad outlook should rob the plan of any element of fantasy which the narrow outlook of 1,900 years ago, or of only 30 years ago, might have demanded. It will be shown that the surface of the moon is in fact a land area of the many worlds fashioned like this earth, of which Moses spoke. It will be proved that the surface of the moon is a land area of the many mansions which Christ's parable mentioned. Technical divisions of the United States government have already publicly announced that, if occasion require, they could put a man on the surface of the moon. Something has been written about the moon in a previous chapter. Much more can be written. The moon has always befuddled astronomers and their associated theorists. It does not fit into the man-made mechanistic pattern of the universe. it continues to present itself as a celestial riddle because theorists mistakenly persist in considering it an isolated body remote from other celestial sky-like areas, whereas the moon represents celestial sky area where solar reflection, at varying angles during our calendar month, accentuates the natural skylight of celestial areas in the reflection's course. That course is dictated by the sun's movement. Hence it is the reflection at different angles, which produces for terrestrial inhabitants the spectacle commonly known as phases of the moon. Such condition has lacked adequate explanation for many centuries. And it must forever be without explanation if we continue mistakenly to construe the moonlight as indicative of an isolated body. The moon of our observation is most definitely not a body of any nature, unless we wish to consider it a body of celestial skylight holding the additional light of solar reflection. In a realistic view of the universe whole, it represents only an isolated celestial skylight condition. And the isolated condition is produced by the only truly isolated body in the entire creation, that is the sun. Thus, through that sun's reflection on the gaseous and moving celestial skylight, there is developed light shadings conveniently described as the man in the moon. The shadings do not represent anything on the celestial land surface underlying the dual luminosity of natural celestial skylight intensified by solar reflection. They are sole products of light existing in celestial sky area over the celestial land. Experience has shown that the so-called man in the moon light shadings may be considered any of numerous formations, depending upon individual fancy, when observed from different altitudes and under varying circumstances of observation. However, and regardless of any and all interpretations of what the light shadings resemble, the dark patches in that luminous celestial moon area remain aspects of the luminosity. They bear no relation whatever to the celestial land underlying the luminosity. The most obvious condition of light shading is at no time afforded consideration by the astronomer. He seeks to establish it as an aspect of the land by intensive magnification of the celestial skylight area already magnified through solar reflection. From that intensified magnification of light is developed the numerous light pits. They are submitted for unwary public view as the astronomer's classical canyons on the moon. Most astounding. The light distortions resulting from magnification of skylight over a celestial land area known as the moon are interpreted as landmass formations on the land surface of that particular celestial area. Such astronomical conclusion develops in spite of the fact that the celestial land area cannot be telescopically detected through the celestial skylight density where the light pit canyons are produced. Were the land under that doubly illuminated celestial sky area completely covered with realistic canyons known to exist on some terrestrial land areas, there's no lens capable of detecting them through the active luminous sky gas. As previously related, that luminous and active sky gas covers the entire land of the universe whole. And recent U.S. naval research has established that it likewise covers every land area of the Earth. Therefore, the Russian government, in common with any other government, can during the next 2 years explore the land surface underlying the light of the moon. Such memorable accomplishment will not require shooting up or out from terrestrial land areas. Nor will any fantastic speed of movement be required. The airplane speeds of our time will be sufficient. More important to our time is the celestial land exploration accomplished to date by that government, which does not publicize all its findings for the benefit of Christian nations. As this chronicle of prophecy's fulfillment was being brought to timely conclusion, an international news dispatch of April 6, 1955, dealt with celestial matters much closer to terrestrial areas than the moon. That message, despite its seeming fantasia, was attired in the raiment of realism now adequately attiring the also once dreamed sky-piercing rockets, guided missiles and atom bombs. It spoke of reality equivalent to that of the familiar electric light, refrigerator, automobile, and airplane. It told in no uncertain terms of the United States government's expedition for conquest of land areas of the universe about us. And that conquest was not to be through the conjectured manner of shooting up, or out, from the terrestrial level, bird to construct Navy base on South Pole expedition. The Navy announcement said that 5 ships, 14 planes, a mobile construction battalion with special Antarctic equipment and a total of 1,393 officers and men will be involved in the expedition. Specification for the South Pole base provide, the expedition shall procure the necessary material and construct a satellite base at the South Pole. A satellite base at the South Pole. An unprecedented expedition of airplanes, ships, and manpower was to move straight ahead over land and, if feasible, on the water was extending beyond the South Pole point. And that expedition was to penetrate into celestial land areas which appear to be up from the Earth. Popular misconception, holding to the traditional shooting up fallacy, may question the necessity for such a lengthy journey to the South Pole to establish a base for movement into celestial areas. That question would be kindred to the 1928 conjecture by friends of Captain Sir George Hubert Wilkins. It may be recalled that their misconception caused them to believe that Wilkins would be drawn through space to another planet if he ventured beyond the South Pole. The question would be reasonable only in the orthodox and erroneous outlook that the terrestrial were in fact isolated in accordance with assumption of theory. We would have to shoot up to reach celestial areas. And since there will be no shooting up, we are not isolated from the universe. Hence, the planned course of the United States government should at long last provide convincing evidence that the Earth is not isolated in space, and that course of movement straight ahead beyond the South Pole should make it manifest that there is no other course. If the government officials responsible for that announcement had been planning a movement other than over accredited land beyond the South Pole, it would be unreasonable to establish a satellite base at such a remote point. The base could more conveniently be established in Maryland, or at any other more accessible point. It was disclosed that the world's elder explorer, Rear Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd, was to command the government's memorable expedition into that endless land beyond the South Pole. Rear Admiral Byrd was a very practical person who knew that he did not shoot up or out from the North Pole point in performance of his 1947 journey over land and water extending beyond Earth's supposed northern end. He did not contemplate a flight movement contrary to that which would transport him from his Boston home to the Navy building in Washington, D.C. He knew that he was to move straight ahead on terrestrial level from the South Pole point. Prior to his departure from San Francisco, he delivered the momentous radio announcement, "This is the most important expedition in the history of the world." The subsequent January 13, 1956, penetration of land beyond the pole to an extent of 2,300 miles proved that the Admiral had not been exaggerating. For the United States base at that point is the most important base this nation, or any other nation, has ever held. Hence the now proved movement straight ahead and on the same level from either pole point will establish terrestrial man on the land of his celestial cousins. And our celestial cousins will bear all the physical characteristics of terrestrial men and women. For, strange as it may seem and difficult of comprehension as it no doubt is for the astronomers, celestial inhabitants of the same quality and quantity of oxygen as that to which we have access at terrestrial points. The land extending beyond both terrestrial imaginary poles is imminent area of worlds beyond the poles. It is an area of the worlds envisioned by the prophet Moses 3,300 years ago. It is a land area room of the many mansions of Christ's disclosures 1,930 years ago. Just beyond the northern and southern polar fringes of the terrestrial continue the celestial land and waters leading throughout the universe whole. From such polar points we may at once and at will continue a journey, without shooting up, to the valley of the moon, and to Mars and Jupiter, and to any other area of the universe whole. The so-called heavens above, to be observed at every angle out from the terrestrial, begin where the northern and southern terrestrial polar ice diminishes. A 7-hour flight into land areas of the heavens above was accomplished in the memorable naval exploit of February 1947. That performance beyond the North Pole point of theory was so simple that adequate explanation would have rendered it most confusing. And it is evident that no one was capable of explaining. In that 1947 Naval Task Force flight there was land, and water, and vegetation, under the airplane course as progress was made north from the North Pole point. If the naval force had possessed motive supplies enabling them to continue, and the equipment to provide essential bases along the route, they could have penetrated into the celestial for 100,000 miles and more, instead of only 1,700 miles. The 1956 naval penetration of land beyond the South Pole extended for 2,300 miles over land area of the so-called heavens above. Recent and planned international polar expeditions can extend as far into the universe about us as their resources will permit. There is no end to the extent of possible penetration. The unlimited natural wealth of celestial areas extending from the terrestrial pole points has already developed a spirit of bitter competition between nations. And it should stimulate all possible corporate exploitation. After centuries of empty conjecture, knowledge is at hand that land routes to the untold wealth of the deceivingly patterned universe extend beyond the ice-locked passages of the North Pole and the South Pole. Continued penetration of such areas will develop discovery of presently unknown human life, and other animal forms. Yesteryear's dread of the fearful unknown may be dispelled in the light of unprecedented modern research and discovery, for they confirm that there is no northern or southern end to the earth. The terrestrial world is in fact a world without end. It is so, or I could not have told you. Light of illusion, light that seemingly so far, you are not a detached star, and no mystery can be of your shining quality. Though your twinkle seems to be, it's a trick eyes play on me, for I've learned how they deceive, an illusory image leave. As patch of outer celestial sky, you're bewitching to the eye, yet you cover unseen land, as does earthly sky at hand. You know not isolation's plight, though presenting lonely sight, for your reluctant sky embrace, common to this earthly place. And at last I'm on my way to visit neath your bright display. I won't have to move through space in fantastic rocket pace. Straight ahead from polar region, over land and waters legion, moving in established manner, I'll reach your celestial manor. F. Amadeo Giannini 1959 Physical Continuity of the Universe. The enclosed pages contain the first and only description of the realistic universe of land, water, oxygen, and vegetation, where human and other forms of animal life abound. This is not a work of fiction, nor is it a technical analysis of anything. It is a simple recital of fact which transcends the most elaborate fiction ever conceived. It projects man's first understanding of the factual and endless universe which contains human life throughout its vast length and width, regardless of all abstract theory to the contrary.